Hong Kong's political landscape is set for a shake-up after Carrie Lam announced she will not be running for a second term as chief executive. In the past 5 years, Mrs. Lam has seen the city through its worst political crisis and navigated China's zero-COVID policy to contain the global pandemic. Mrs. Lam says she informed Beijing of her decision last year, citing family considerations as her main priority after her term ends. For more on this story, Deborah Wong joins us live from Hong Kong. Deborah, Mrs. Lam's term has been quite an eventful one. What is the ground sentiment on her performance and the legacy she leaves behind?
Well, Mrs. Lam's scorecard is not a very good one because political observers are telling me that her decision to not run for a second term, actually it doesn't come as a surprise because the writing has been on the wall for some time now. Now, we take a look at her 5-year term. You know, it's a term that's been marked by anti-government protests in 2019 as well as electoral reforms. But on top of that, Mrs. Lam did forge ahead with the national security law, which scored some points with Beijing because it quelled the social unrest. And then COVID-19 hit. So despite relative calm at the beginning, you know, we've seen the 5th coronavirus outbreak actually go out of control in Hong Kong. There are high infection rates as well as a high death toll. And it prompted earlier this year, President Xi Jinping to urge the Hong Kong leaders to make solving the current outbreak an overriding priority. So following that statement, Mrs. Lam delayed the March 27 election. It was originally scheduled to be on March 27. She delayed that to say that she would devote all her time and resources to focus on solving the current crisis. And her administration really has faced pressure on all sides. And, you know, there's a lot of frustration on the ground as well. But, you know, we have to look at it fairly because Mrs. Lam did inherit a city from a wildly unpopular predecessor, C.Y. Leong, who was seen as engaging in China's interests over the Hong Kong's interests, and that actually contributed to the umbrella movement in 2014. And political party DAB also did say that Mrs. Lam was placed in a very tough position because she had to handle all these conflicts at the same time during her tenure. But she is recognized as a hardworking civil servant. You know, she has spent 42 years serving Hong Kong, and we have seen that commitment play out because she has been fronting the daily COVID-19 press releases.
Deborah, how's the race for May 8th shaping up with Mrs. Lam now out of the picture?
Well, officially, it's been quiet. But, you know, sources have been informing local media in weeks leading up to nomination period that the Chief Secretary, John Lee, is actually tipped to resign and throw his head in the ring. And, you know, it's not surprising because analysts are telling me that with Beijing's focus on national security as a stabilizer in Hong Kong, Mr. Lee does seem to be quite a likely choice. Now, Mr. Lee is a former security chief as well as a former deputy police commissioner, and he did take a central role in executing the national security law, which saw dozens of, actually scores of political activists arrested and liberal media outlets shuttered. So his appointment as chief secretary is actually the first time that a former police officer took a top administrative role. And it's clear that security is Beijing's priority in an increasingly polarized world. So Mr. Lee's background really puts him in a clear trajectory to take on the top job. Now, Mrs. Lam declined to comment on this particular development during the press conference. And for more, here's a look at what the analysts told me.
From the anti-government protests in 2019, the Beijing imposed electoral reforms, to the city's increasing isolation under COVID-19, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam's term has been a crucible of political tensions. After months of speculation, she clarified that she will not seek a second term. While previously tipped to be a top contender, analysts now say it's not a surprising move, given that her popularity has plummeted.
I think in her 5 years office, the Hong Kong has become greatly polarized. And so Beijing also has to take up some drastic actions on handling the Hong Kong issues, such as the national security law and also such as the changing the Hong Kong electoral system. And it means that if the performance of Carrie Lam is good, and then Beijing may not intervene in such a way. And such kinds of interventions indicate that even Beijing dissatisfied with her performance.
From now till the end of her term on 30th of June, Mrs. Lam says she will ensure the smooth operation of pandemic work and the election, which will run as scheduled on 8th May. Understandably, she was questioned whether her policies like the government restructuring plan and Northern Metropolis will be affected. These long-term plans were previously seen as indicators for a second term. Mrs. Lam says they're well received, and so she trusts that the next government will see the plans through. She declined to comment on whether she will take on other political appointments, just as her predecessors, C.Y. Leong and Tung Chee-hwa, have. Her announcement paves the way for a new contender. Hong Kong's number 2 official, Chief Secretary of Administration, John Lee, has been tipped to resign and run for the top job. The rumour mill was in overdrive over the weekend, after sources told local media both him and Mrs. Lam attended a meeting in Shenzhen on Friday. Sources say Mr. Lee is well placed to serve, given his security background, a critical strength for Hong Kong to tap on following the sweeping 2019 protests.
Mainly because the central government believes that national security is a priority in the Hong Kong situation. By national security, it means not only political security of the regime, but also public health security. And the central government officials, believe that John Lee, as a kind of national security official, will be sensitive enough to deal with public health crisis and also protests, all other things. So the priority of the central government in Beijing is to stabilize Hong Kong in the short run.
Mrs. Lam declined to comment on talk around Mr. Lee's potential bid, but she clarified that she hasn't received any resignation from any official. She did say, however, that the new government will have a more stable political environment under the electoral reforms. Regardless, this is the first indication that preparation for the chief executive race is finally underway. Well, up to last week, there was still talk that it could be further delayed. So the hopefuls have until April 16 to secure nominations. Deborah Wong, CNA, Hong Kong.